certainly very excited to have Dr. Brad Glazer on our educational webinar presentation tonight. I'm Darwin Shurig, president of Shurig Solutions Incorporated and a member of the MRI family. SSI helps solve the largest challenges for clinical, regulatory, quality, and engineering in the med device, IVD, and pharma industries. One of the additional things that we do is try to bring content that brings value to our following in the areas that we're focused on. So with that in mind, tonight's webinar, again, I'm super excited to have Brad with us. Brad got his degree in pharmacy from Northern Ohio, got his PhD in his doctorate in pharmacy from Purdue University. He's a published author, well-known lecturer in the areas of medical communication, medical affairs, governance, and really anything compliance related. Currently, he's the Senior Director of Strategy and Delivery for the Worldwide Medical Division of Baxter Healthcare. He's responsible for a team that supports operations in the delivery of clinical studies, investigator-sponsored research, other areas I'm sure that it's probably too many to mention, but Brad has over 25 years in the pharmaceutical and med device industries in a variety of different leadership positions, tied into medical affairs, compliance, medical governance, field medical and communications. So I've actually known you for the entire amount of your industry experience, amazingly.
Yes.
And before that. And then lastly, a great man of integrity, a family guy. He is an actual legendary finisher of the Krispy Kreme Challenge, for sure. And also a noted horse whisperer. So Brad is an incredible giver and someone that actually started his own nonprofit charity for therapeutic writing, and the center is called Bright Star Stable. So not many people can say that. So welcome, Brad. Super excited to have you on tonight and have this conversation about clinical evidence generation.
Thank you, Darwin. My privilege to be here, my friend. It's always good to see you and get to connect in this different environment. As you mentioned, we've known each other for almost 30 years. So it's been my privilege to be a friend of yours, and happy to jump into this forum to share what I can with you.
When I told Jamie that she didn't realize that you were going to be our guest for this conversation tonight, and so she sent me this long text. She was like, "It's just incredible that you're going to have the opportunity, all the different ways you guys have connected and collaborated over the years to be able to do this from a professional perspective." So I'm super excited about it as well. So. All right. So we want to talk about a variety of things today to bring value to our audience. So the key general topic, clinical evidence generation. So why don't you start us off in sort of defining what that looks like relevant to the FDA and the clinical evidence guidelines?
Yeah. So maybe, as you mentioned, I've spent 25 years in this industry, most of it heavily slanted towards pharma. And general development of drugs is pretty structured within the pharma world, and FDA and EMEA and other regulatory bodies give you a pretty clear path to how to bring a product like a drug to market. So evidence generation in that world is really driven by what is the unmet medical need you're trying to meet. From a product perspective, and what evidence do you think you need to generate to meet that need? And I guess it's relatively more straightforward in the drug side, because you're looking at the effect of a drug on a body. It produces some type of impact related to some disease or condition, and then you're trying to prove that your drug works as you say it's supposed to. So you develop studies that work in that space. Devices is a whole nother game. In that world of evidence, right? And evidence, as I've learned in my short career here in the device world, means a whole bunch of different things. From the sense of, does it work as it's designed from an engineering perspective? Is it similar to stuff that's already on the market? typical claims that you might have in a pharma world don't necessarily translate into that same space in the device world. Most of the devices that are out there don't have a whole lot of indication information in their approved labelings. And so, how do you generate clinical evidence that means anything in the device world outside of, let's say, higher risk class 3 devices or PMA related devices? I think one of the benefits we've gotten is the EU MDR regulations that have come out in Europe that really are going to hone in to say, hey, you need to prove some clinical benefit to your products if you're going to market those in Europe. And I think that's really forced, at least the two companies I've been involved with on the device side, to really think about what is it we're trying to state about these products, what type of clinical evidence do we need, and how do we go about getting it in products, some of them that are 20, 25 years old that have been in the market for a while, and others that are coming along new who may not be high risk or devices that you would want to do that. What do we do in those spaces? So it's been a really interesting journey.
You mentioned a really key point in terms of on the pharma side, you're trying to develop a product and you're defining its efficacy, you're defining the therapeutic area or disease process that you wanted to treat, what type of contraindications, symptoms, effects, side effects from that, and then define that it brings a benefit to a patient population within a relevant risk that's acceptable with the fewest amount of side effects, and it's a reproducible product. But that formula, in terms of after you've defined that, is fairly straightforward, whereas you just spoke to the complexity of the medical device side. And when you think about the higher percentage of products that come to market are piggybacked off the 510K process. So there's a predicate device that's already in the marketplace. And you're trying to say that, hey, our product clinically and how it affects patients does the exact same thing. It's just got some different bells and whistles. So is that part of how it's a little more challenging to determine that clinical evidence generation? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you say that the two companies I've been at, like 80% of the products are 510K related products, and we have absolutely no data clinically from a study perspective on it. Now, we've got a ton of use data, right? And so I think as you look at the complexity of clinical evidence in the world of devices, the shift we're in is one where we actually will probably move towards more real world evidence. And what do we actually have when our products are being used? Because to do a larger scale clinical study for some of these products, one, it doesn't financially make sense for the company, and two, it's probably not going to show anything that you don't already know from real world evidence anyway.
Right.
And so,
and your margins
margins are really tight. So, coming from the pharma side, it's just baked into the overall operating model that for developing a product, you're going to spend millions in the development space from a clinical trial perspective, and the device side, you don't have that kind of margin in developing products and bringing them through.
Yeah, you're less significant expenditure up front because you can get into the market more quickly because of piggybacking off of that existing device. But then you don't have, obviously the expense isn't as huge as on the pharma side, but then you get there a little bit quicker, but you got to be more efficient in how you manage your business processes and your expenses.
Absolutely. And so it's good. And on the pharma side, I think they can learn a lot from the device side, right? How do you get more nimble? How do you get more agile? How do you think differently? And the flip is on the device side that have been out, you can learn a little bit from a little bit of the risk management strategies that pharma employs with drug development, and apply a little bit of that to the device side. I think there's learnings on both ways.
So one of the things when I was at RAPS Convergence this year, they did a great job of being able to make that first virtual convergence. And a lot of the messaging and conversations through that were a lot of positive things. Obviously, the pandemic, and we'll talk a little bit more about this specifically. I'd love to get your perspective on a couple of things. But it's been a challenge in a lot of different ways and for different people. But a lot of the topics and conversations were a lot of the positive things that are going to come from it in terms of clinical data, the remote opportunities, the opportunities for medical devices as software. And so curious what you've seen so far in that regard at your time at Baxter. And then certainly a lot of clinical trials opportunities. And from an opportunity standpoint, for those in the U.S., the pandemic has caused some of those opportunities and jobs to come back over here to the United States from Europe. So curious what your perspective is and what you're seeing there.
So as you alluded to, there's lots of opportunities, on the clinical front. Probably true to everybody. We had some challenges with the pandemic and just either delaying studies, delaying recruitment, things that you really wouldn't think about setting out into this of how do you shut down a study? If you've actually got to go into a site and you can't get in there, how do you go in? Or how does the patient get their last visit in for the study? Or So I think it's forced not only the companies as the sponsors to really think differently, it's forced the investigators to think differently. And so, we've employed virtual technologies. We can do virtual interviews. We've done virtual quality checks. We've done virtual closeouts of sites. You get group Zoom meetings together with investigators. You've got IRB meetings on Zoom calls. And a whole host of ways that it's really forced us to think differently about the experience. From a logistical perspective, I think the other piece that I've come to appreciate is there's a psychological component of the pandemic for people wanting to be in research that we're starting to see. People don't necessarily want to go into the doctor. They don't necessarily want to go into the hospital.
Right.
So in this world of recruitment or encouraging people, there's a psychological component that's far beyond what we had before. But I think we're going to find ways to get through.
Yes, it adds certainly an additional degree of complexity to an already somewhat complex process.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at that factor of some of our things we're looking at is how do you move the care and the study to the patient's home? Whether you're studying things that are home care related. So for example, Baxter is in the renal business and we do a lot of home peritoneal dialysis, right? So how do you take that, or you take our research to them? How are you going to meet the patients where they are and physicians where they are in the research space? I think it'll shift our paradigm, certainly into using technologies, certainly integrating devices that have ability to track data and communicate data through the device. I think we'll see a lot of that use in the research.
And cybersecurity is a huge concern. And a lot of these devices, it was from a ventilation standpoint, when I was at Philips and we brought that ventilator over to the US, and starting to be able to see scenarios where you could have downloadable data from the ventilation device and the potential to have clinical evaluation and physician interaction remotely, but then the fears of how that can be affected from a cybersecurity standpoint. So that's going to come into play even more. From a clinical evidence generation perspective, could you speak a little bit to, before the pandemic, some of the sort of best practices, and then how you've seen things adjust from the pandemic? And you just talked about some of the things that you've changed to get more from a remote standpoint, but maybe even give us a percentage of what that looks like before and after.
Sure. So from an evidence perspective, I think we've gotten better at looking holistically at not only a development view that says, hey, we think we have an unmet medical need, or we think we have a opportunity to improve our device, and so this is the study we want to do to prove that.
Okay.
I think we've gotten better at the voice of the healthcare provider and the patient in that scenario. Okay. Taking into account what patients are telling us, what do they see as features that we can improve, what do they want from their perspective, what are healthcare providers seeing and hearing. At least in my short tenure here, was not a large aspect of what we did, but it's getting bigger. Okay, because I think the two factors. One is patient voice has a bigger say now, and in continuing to go that way. And I think patients have choices, and not all the time with devices will they have the choices, but I think they're getting more choices and they can influence more from the healthcare provider perspective. And so listening to what matters to them, I think is going to really be important for us. You ask about kind of post-pandemic and all that activity. When the pandemic hit, we were 100% remote. I mean, everything was done remote. I think we're starting to take back up a little bit from a clinical execution perspective, but a lot of our CRO partners that we work with and a lot of our internal staff are still working remotely, either by their choice or by the choice of the institution that they would be going into, hospitals, offices.
Depending on what state they're in as well, I'm sure plays into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really complex situation and one that I didn't probably fully understand as we were going into it, just the operational challenges that would play out as the whole infrastructure of healthcare kind of got impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge in a lot of different ways. One thing that you said that I'd like for you to speak to a little bit more is from a usability standpoint, usability factors and studies. And you look at the last 10 years, it used to be your systems engineers, they wanted to kind of try to fill that particular skill set as well. And it's become its own entity, where it's a lot of opportunity there. How is that paradigm shifted at Baxter, and what's your system look like in terms of from a usability standpoint and how you tie those? Do you have a complete group? Do you contract that piece out?
I think it's a mix of approach. It's certainly, as you point out, a huge factor as we roll out the next generation of devices or advancements in devices. Usability is huge. Obviously, we do a lot of use testing, human factor studies that help us get insight into how things are being done. But at Baxter, we have a pretty big mix of products. It's probably the first company I've been at where it truly is a very, very broad spectrum of products. And so I think it just depends on what area we're in and how much advancement's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of COVID, how big's your group, and is it global or only in the United States?
It's global. So in all of Worldwide Medical, there's about 400 people in the organization there, but globally on the ClinOps side, we're deployed globally. So certain areas, let's say Europe and Asia, it's been tough. I mean, it's really been tough. Obviously, Asia was impacted first. So our folks in China and Japan, were first ones to kind of be quarantined and move to this virtual working. I've got teams in Europe who, I think are doing well in this space, but, their whole office world has been shut down. And so life is very different for them, not only inside of work, but outside of work. And so it's been interesting to understand the cultural differences and the impact differences on different regions.
And really, I think how leaders gauge the emotional aspect and the sanity piece. I think that in terms of there are people and candidates and people that I respect greatly and good people, very intelligent, that are not sick, are not financially impacted directly, that are feel depressed at times. And so I think in terms of how different everything is and the remote aspect, making sure that you're having those extra touches, how are you doing, what's going on? And they understand that we all have the same challenges, and what, relevant to, I want to get your perspective on that, and the proactivity piece and how you've managed that, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's critical, this, so you and I have worked remotely people foreign lives. And so, you know, you kind of get this blend of life and work all in the same space. And with the teams here, gosh, a lot of this was new. Like, oh my gosh, you know, all the way basic stuff like, where am I going to put my computer? Where am I going to set up my office? I got kids. I got a spouse. I got a parent I take care of. I got pets. You know, school's not in session anymore. So now my kids are at home all the time, and virtual learning. And, you know, it's so for us, it was the first wave was more about psychologically, how you doing? How you holding up? How are all these pressures of, you know, changes in your social life, changes in, you know, your friends and the people you can connect with, and all the things we experience in that space of the initial shutdowns. And some, you know, people in other markets, I mean, it was completely shut down. I mean, like nothing was happening. You could leave house for basic things of going to the store and to get gas, and healthcare workers and stuff like that, or going to see a doc, but nothing else. So huge toll psychologically initially as people went in that. So we did a lot of just, I call it touch points, touchy-feely things, just to make sure, how you doing, man? How are you doing? That was a lot of my conversation early on with people. Didn't want to know about the work. I'm like, how are you doing? Like,
yeah.
And it was brilliant for me to learn about people like that. You know, I don't always pause and ask that and really listen, like how you doing? And in that moment, when we first started this, there was a lot of that, like, how are you doing? And some of them, it was not good, right? To be honest, it was not good.
Yeah.
But true to the form of folks and humanity is that they evolved, and I think they've gotten into a rhythm. I think for me as a leader, you know, just kind of being real with people and showing them that, like, I have this screwy life too. Like, there's kids in the background. I can tell you, the first video call during all the COVID shutdown, I don't know, maybe 100 people on the call. And I didn't close the door to my office. And Heather walks in, my wife, leans over in the morning, gives me a kiss on the cheek. Here I am on this video cast, you know.
And now
hey, baby, say hi to everybody.
And everybody knows now what a smooth operator, and that you must be an incredible salesman, because they're like,
yeah,
look at this beautiful lady.
That's right. I definitely married up, man. It was good stuff. So, you know, it's one of those, and I have the kids occasionally come running through, and the dog runs through, and sometimes I'll be in a sweatshirt and a hoodie, and just to kind of, you know, like, look, life is real. I'm real. You're real. It's just what it is. And so we're all in this together. And sometimes it's tough. But we'll get through it. And I think giving people a lot of empathy and space to get through things, and if they got to deal with it, you know, deal with the kids, deal with whatever, they just go deal with it.
I was doing,
so
we've got a lot going on right now. I was doing a debrief earlier today, and we're doing more video interactions with our clients than ever before because of it. It's like, you're already doing it for your teams and your interviews. And I've had multiple of them there. It's like, we should have been doing this before anyway, but we're doing a debrief. We're talking about the interview, and all of a sudden, the client is like, "Stop that! Put that down!" And I was like, "What did I do?" But his kids were doing something on the stairway. And everybody just busted out laughing. It's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And everybody's like, "Yeah, no, it's okay. I get it." But one of the things that I always point out, and I know that you'll appreciate that, and one of the people that's on this, and she knows who she is, great human being that I've had the opportunity to partner with. When this happened, I was talking to her over the summer, and she's like, I had an hour drive one way. So I got 2 hours back in my life, and that windshield time's gone. And I feel like I'm working as hard or not harder than I was before. And so my point is that, and you and I have lived this our entire lives, until this business, I always traveled and then had a home office. And you hire the right people, you're in these type of remote positions. The biggest challenge is that you have to set boundaries, because you'll end up working all the time.
Absolutely. And having managed teams remote, worked remote, it's always there. It's right in front of you. And like I said, there's this blending of life and work, and they happen together. And certainly, as you say, set boundaries. The other thing I found during this COVID transition as the teams are working remotely is there's a guilt factor that's surfacing in people setting those boundaries.
Yeah.
People are apologizing. I got to go. I have to run out to take care of something in the middle of the day. I'm like, okay, you just go run out in the middle of the day. Or, oh, I'm sorry, I can't start till 10 o'clock. I got to drop the kid here. I'm like, okay, it's all good. My encouragement to my team is you don't have to tell me that. I'm not worried about where you are. This is not being a remote is not something when you lead remote teams where you worry about where people are. You just kind of trust that they're getting the job done. You look at the output from their job, and you encourage them. But I have found that the team that has mainly been office-based and have been put remotely here suffer a lot from a guilt factor of just stepping away. I'm like, man, if you don't step away, you're going to go crazy here. You've got to step away. Yeah. And if that step away means you go step out for a couple hours and you come back, great, go at it. Have a good time. Because when you're in the office, as you say, you get the breaks for lunch and social happens, and you're not always constantly
more defined structure. It's a more defined structure. And with this, it's so much more fluid. And those boundaries are not as defined as they were in the past.
Absolutely.
So
it's been a learning. It's good.
How do you proactively handle that so that the sort of the psyche and the temperature of your team, have you noticed as you've been more, or the things that you've done to be more proactive relevant to that, where you've seen an improvement?
I think first it's just talking about it, like get it out there. Because there's almost this like shame of like, I feel bad, I feel guilty. Or the fact that I'm overloaded and working all the time. And so one was just getting it out there, talking about it, having teams come together and say, hey, what are your strategies? How do you manage this? I think the other was modeling the behavior. Because they're looking if your boss sends an email at 9 o'clock at night, what's that say?
Yeah.
He's probably looking for some response, or she's looking for some response. So trying to model the boundaries as well, to say, you know what, I'm not going to start meetings before 8 o'clock. I'm trying not to start any after 4 o'clock to give people time in the ends if they need it. I don't send any emails to the group after 5 o'clock. Just trying to model some of those boundary behaviors, because as much as I say, hey, I'll send this, but don't respond, they feel compelled. They're going to look at it. They're going to, even if they don't respond, they're spending energy on it when they didn't really need to.
Right. Not smart. So let's talk about the alternative evidence, clinical evidence generation, and if we can get in, any specifics in terms of what you were doing before, and then what the alternative has been.
Yeah. So in the drug side, you have your traditional clinical trial studies. But with pharma, there's been such a huge push to understand real world evidence and what is happening. So in that space, 10 years or so ago, it started hey, you have databases, electronic medical records, you have outcomes that are in insurance databases, you have ways to understand, what you said you thought was going to happen in a small clinical trial. How's that actually playing out in the real world? Because as a clinical trial on the drug side is so controlled, right? So you try and manage or de-risk the program with all your inclusion and exclusion criteria so that you get, really understanding that pure effect of what's happening as best you can. But when it gets turned out to millions of people, you start to really get to see what does the impact look like. And so that had led to a lot of that activity in the pharma side, and certainly then translated into health outcomes impact, right? So if you said you're going to do this, what's the data say? And then what's the impact, right? So if you're asking an insurance company to incrementally pay more for your product, what are they getting back?
Right.
It's all about money. So on the device side, we haven't had that same kind of pressure. We haven't been in the same spotlight from a cost perspective in the healthcare system. I can't say that that's not going to happen. And certainly we're talking about it from a strategy perspective. Like, you know, at the moment, things are okay. Or in some areas where, let's say in renal care, you get bundle pricing and care from CMS, right? So CMS gives you a certain allotment of money to take care of patients who have kidney disease. And so you're trying to maximize that money for the impact that you can have in their treatment. And certainly we want to play a part in that. So our devices, we should be better at saying, what do you get for your money?
Right.
You know, not only from a immediate impact, but a longer term impact. So it's causing us to think a little differently about the data we might need, the value proposition that you can say about your product. If you go in and you ask CMS to give you $40 million more for your product next year, collectively, across all the patients that they treat, their logical question is, what do I get for that?
Mm-hmm.
And so on the pharma side, you know, that dialogue was happening on a very regular basis within the study world. I think as we look at devices, you know, in our data-driven era, we have a lot of data about products. We're just trying to how do you pair that together with a clinical impact or a financial impact to a healthcare system. So if you look at an integrated pharmacy delivery system, right, from the order all the way to delivery, and you had an integrated platform from a technology perspective that managed all that, what time savings could you get? What error rate savings could you get? You know, things along those lines, nursing time, administration time, start really coming with data to understand the benefit of these devices.
I think on the device side, and the specific example I think of is you know, COPD, respiratory failure type of patient. There's opportunities to look at it from a cost center standpoint in a different way, where you're typically looking at, okay, cause and effect and generating revenue from helping fix whatever that situation is. Yeah. But you take a COPD patient, they go into the hospital, and terms of readmittance. So they go from the hospital skilled nursing facility, and then how much money is lost because of the way the billing is done if they go back within a certain period of time. So how do you bundle those things? How do you add in, you know, maybe it's non-invasive ventilation, different modalities that specific modality maybe isn't, it's a cost savings. And it more of an indirect revenue source because of the money that it's saving. You have to look at med device a little bit different, I think, from that standpoint than the pharmaceutical.
Absolutely, and again, it's cost avoidance. You know, from a downstream holistic effect, right? So you got to look at the entire system of somebody coming in, getting a device, and being able to tell that value proposition, I think, will be interesting. I've seen a couple examples where companies are putting their money where their mouth is. It says, hey, we actually believe we can save your healthcare system X amount if you use our integrated platforms or our technologies that talk to each other. Let's say the pump technology, greater efficiencies by these various devices communicating together on a common technology platform, sharing data back to healthcare administrators in the operational end of things. That you know, I think that's probably a really good thing. That says, hey, we think we can save you 20% on nursing time. We think you can cut your pharmacy error rates down by 15%, leading to less need to treatment for side effects. We think, you know, X, Y, and Z, and that collective package, we think you can save your institution X amount of money, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is.
So they're making decisions based on real-time data versus looking at it after the fact and then making reactive decisions based on those trends. That's
correct. Correct.
So
we'll see how all that kind of plays out. I would anticipate that as the healthcare structure in the U.S. gets crunched more and more from a financial perspective, all of us are going to have to show some type of economic value for new innovative devices that may charge a premium price, or even switching from what you currently have to something else. What's the value proposition and story that you can tell?
There's going to be greater there's going to be greater focus on outcomes and then differentiation of those outcomes. Does your product have multiple outcomes that it brings to the table? You know, you almost think about a medication, the efficacy there. The specificity of what that looks like from the outcome is going to be even more important.
Yeah, and on the pharma side, you know, correlating there, you look for impact of a drug, and you translate that into a per patient and then a cost implication per se, to say, hey, if you know, Darwin, I think your blood pressure is going to go down by 10%, which may lead you to less risk of a heart attack later or a stroke, which could save X amount. I think the insurance companies in that space and healthcare HMOs and all that are saying, prove it, like tell me for sure. And is that 8% really clinically significant? Mm-hmm. On the device side, right, I think we'll face the similar things. They want the proof. They want the, give me the information, give me the data, and tell me it translates into a real clinical benefit or a financial benefit for us as either healthcare providers or as a business, because they're businesses too.
Mm-hmm. So one thing for those viewing and from a career advancement standpoint, I mean, you've had a really broad bandwidth of experience in these different areas we talked about before, in governance and field action, compliance. So I know with the group that you deal with right now, you're dealing with medical writers, you're dealing with quality assurance, certainly the clinical research aspect, how that data is collected. What areas, you know, a lot of the things that we work on, I always laugh when I'm talking to our team, because it's like, well, this is a hard search. It's like everything we do is hard. But what, from a career and opportunity standpoint, for somebody out there that's maybe they're more technical writing, maybe they're clinical research, they're regulatory affairs, quality, where do you see at Baxter or in the last few years sort of trending the areas that are harder to find that talent, and where there's going to be more opportunities because of that?
I think when you look at the talent pieces, having medical or the research area with a higher business acumen has probably been our biggest challenge.
Okay.
In the sense of, we run a business, right? And yeah, sometimes we, and I say we because I'm in the healthcare profession, we tend to think science first, business second. Whereas I think for us and getting leaders and people to be incredibly savvy about the business is probably our biggest gap. So when we're recruiting for some of our open roles, we assume the baseline is the technical competency, right? You understand how to run medical writing stats. You're a good medical affairs person who can design clinical trials. I think it's how do you understand our business from a business lens that will make medical people incredibly successful. I think the other piece is how do you innovate? How do you keep staying ahead of the game and challenging yourself and your current thought processes to think about the next step? What's next? Where are we going? So as we're recruiting for leaders in our teams, that's kind of what we're looking at. And even as we get down to individual contributors, I think from a skill set perspective, we're really pushing to say it's just not good enough to have the baseline technical competency anymore. You got to really understand how you fit into all of what we're doing. And the more you can do that, I think the more successful they'll be.
Yeah, because you understand what the person that you're working with cross-functionally, what is important to them, what their challenges are from their seat. And the more you can understand that connectivity, the more you can understand where somebody else is coming from and be able to meet them in the middle. One thing that you just said right there. So one of the clinical research manager positions we're working on for a client right now, you know, one of the first things when I was talking to the chief medical officer, it's like, I really need somebody that understands the operational side, the budgeting, the data analysis from a compliance standpoint. But the whole conversation and the focus, you know, a lot of times it's, well, have they dealt with protocol development for the trial? setting it up and then managing it from start to finish. But to your point, it was like, hey, we have to run a trial in a financially feasible way.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't a scenario where we have this huge grant or, an academic situation where this can just go on endlessly. No, we have timelines, budgets, and we have to show a profit. So from an efficiency standpoint, that they have to have that piece.
Yeah, and example we recently had, from a traditional perspective, we were working on a clinical program, and they came back with a pretty high budget, let's say roughly about $5 million. And for some of our product portfolio, like $5 million about choked the commercial leaders, like, what? How much? And that was a traditional, like, out of the box kind of, hey, we're going to do this kind of study. It's a 6-month recruitment. It's going to take 18 months in total, 24 months before you have your data. And you could see on the commercial person's face, right? Like, this is lost revenue, 24 months. How much slower could it be?
Yeah.
So really in that scenario, just to pressure test the team, my question was, what if you only had $2 million? What are you going to do? Like, are you not going to do any study? You're just not going to do anything?
Right.
So really pushing them to say, hey, if you're a small mom and pop shop and you don't have deep coffers and all you got is $2 million to invest in this entire development, and all of your company's financial future depends on it. So the faster you get there, the more sustainable your company is. What are you going to do? You're going to say you're not going to do it?
Right.
So it was fascinating because you could see what it did is the team's brains were unlocked at the moment, right? Someone said, hey, step outside of your box, get outside of your normal swim lane, and think totally different, right? Like put on a different hat, put on an innovative, an entrepreneurial hat. And I have done consulting work for smaller startup companies and learn a ton by that approach, right? They are like incredibly innovative. Now, They take some big risks that maybe bigger companies wouldn't, but at the same time, it really does challenge you to think differently. And I think that's a good thing for our teams. And again, for medical folks, it's really good to be pushed and think differently.
You make such a really interesting point. And I'm sitting here thinking, as you said, they take certain risks and you have to be able to juggle more balls. You have to look at things from different angles or you won't be here. I've certainly lived through that. And ironically, the bigger company, which has more resources and has the ability to take the risk much more, can have a tendency to be more siloed, be more disconnected. And well, this is the way we do things. But to your point, having fresh set of eyes, looking at alternative ways to create best practices and efficiencies is you can never arrive, right? You can never stop looking at what that could look like. I don't think.
Absolutely. No, it's always good. And I've seen some brilliant strategies over the years where really senior R&D research leaders and those that do development work for a living have really pushed teams in large companies to start to think innovatively and differently, because you get into a routine. You just turn the crank and you make these engines go in large companies. And so you just say, hey, we're turning the crank. We're going to move the next thing through, and it's going to go through the same process over and over again. And before you knew it, you've institutionalized development, right? It runs on its own. And you run the risk of losing the innovative side of this and the creativity. And so I think that there's a little balance to it. You got to have a little bit of framework, but at the same time, really pushing people to be innovative and think differently.
So as we've talked about, a much greater percentage of your career in pharma, and certainly you've been with big, larger pharma companies, a little bit smaller. You've done some consulting, and then the med device side. So what's your preference at this point, or it just depends on how you feel that
depends. It just depends, man. I'm still learning. I'm fascinated by the device side and the breadth of impact it has. And So my curiosity's peaked and my energy is high because I'm learning so much. The drug side, it's a comfort zone, right? You know how that runs, you know how it goes, you know where the highs and the lows are. So I think it's a mix. I love the fact that I've had the experience on both sides. I feel pretty blessed to be able to say I've jumped between two different camps, and they really are two different worlds in a lot of respects. But in there's some commonality and thread between them.
So in your career, you've obviously been interviewed. You've been somebody that has been sought after the entire time that I've known you by companies. So you've certainly been on that side of the seat. But from an interviewing candidate standpoint, you've got a vast amount of experience there as well. In terms of what we do, what are the biggest challenges you see with candidates, or things where, if for our listeners, areas that make it tougher for somebody to move to the next step from your perspective?
I've interviewed a lot in the last couple of years because I've come into teams that are new and we're growing those teams. And so, finding ways for candidates to differentiate themselves is getting harder and harder because everybody has a really robust resume. I think our tactics of situational based interviewing, where like, tell me about a time when, I think people have really polished those up and really have gotten pretty good at that aspect of it. And in our virtual world, we're not meeting anybody face to face. And so I think that's added the complexity. For me, the folks that differentiate themselves are ones that can connect like almost instantly in an interview, even virtually, right? Yeah. So they get through the basics. They're credible. They know their stuff. They know how our business operates. They know how they can fit in and help us. They've thought through all those basics, right?
They're prepared.
If you can't get over that, they're prepared. They know a plan, right? If you're not there, then you'll easily be filtered out. Right. I think it's the connectivity from an emotional intelligence perspective that I think starts to differentiate folks. You can quickly ascertain in an interview someone's EQ, right? Like their emotional quotient and how are they dealing? Because and I interview leaders. I don't interview as many individual contributors anymore. I need them to connect with their teams and motivate their teams, and that emotional intelligence and their maturity in that space is really what's differentiating people, particularly in a virtual world. Even last week, I interviewed several candidates for a fairly senior position in our organization, and highly qualified, very, very smart, well accomplished people. But one of them just jumped out from a connectivity and emotional maturity and just interpersonal relations and just about how they went about their business. You could say, hey, that was the differentiator.
Yeah, because if they can be a technical genius, they can understand the process in an incredible way. But if they can't connect with other people, if they can't meet them on their level, then they're going to have a hard time bridging the gap and being a catalyst for their group when you have those emotional challenges. And it's never going to be a perfect world.
Right. Yeah. And so, as I said, the baseline is just the as you said, prep and understanding how the company runs and where you fit in, and the technical competencies in a lot of our roles. But it's the differentiator is really the emotional side of being a leader, and it shows.
How many video interviews have you done since the pandemic hit?
Oh, I don't know, 12, 15.
Had anybody get up and they don't have any pants on?
No.
They're in shorts.
Nothing too crazy. No, I haven't had to have anybody pick up the phone and walk to the bathroom in the middle of it, forget they were on an interview. No.
Video interview like you're in person. Put your shoes on.
That's right.
Put it all on. Do it all.
You never know. You might stand up and forget. I will tell you that the technical challenges actually show a little bit of people's resilience. because maybe 20 or 25% of those interviews we've had some technical issues.
All right.
And you can tell when someone is completely flustered as they get back in from a technology perspective.
Uh-huh.
And then you can see the others who are like smooth and like unflappable, and it's just sort of like, okay, that was what it was. Let's just keep going. So again, it tells a lot about how a person's wired when they had something go wrong in this virtual world. And I could tell you, most of them, we have a little bit of technical challenges on every one of them for some reason. And some of them are pretty bad. Like, you know, you and I experienced a little bit in the beginning. You couldn't talk, and I couldn't hear you.
You were very excited. You know, you were very excited you couldn't hear me. That kind of hurt my feelings. But yeah, we had two accepted offers in the last 2 weeks. One of those, I mean, it was a train wreck. Nothing went right. At one point, and that was a senior manager level position, and he was like, "Is this normal?" Like, you know, we've helped I think 9 people go to this company. I'm like, no, it's a pandemic year. What do you know? But the great thing for that person was none of it mattered. He just adjusted smooth. Another candidate got a position, had to interview with the VP. It's a mid-level, no type of position, no direct reports, not a leadership position. Has to interview sort of the final interview with the vice president. Everything IT wise went wrong. She could see him, he couldn't see her, but she just went with it. They figured it out halfway through. They ended up switching to their phones and FaceTiming, but you know, she nailed it because she was cool, she was calm, she was real. So I think very, very important. All right, well, what I want to finish up with, because you're an incredible giver, and we're not going to not talk about, and I think a lot of what you just talked about, we talk a lot about proactivity versus reactivity. You know, what do you stand for? How are you going to determine what you're going to do based on your values? You put your plan in place, and then you know, obviously you make adjustments when you need to, but you stick to that plan. And the idea is to bring value. You're somebody who started your own charitable foundation, and 10 years now?
Yeah, 10 years. Yeah.
Isn't that great? That's incredible. 10 years.
Incredible. Yeah.
I've grown this. You're doing incredible work for kids with, you know, neurological, autonomic challenges. So I want you to tell us a little bit about that journey. I think people appreciate it. I think you guys are doing incredible things for those kids. So
thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a good journey. You know, we started Bright Star Stables 10 years ago. It's hard to believe it went that quick. As you know, Darwin, I grew up with horses and had a real passion for them. I didn't know that life would intersect in this way, you know, when I was a kid growing up and training and showing horses. But you know, that was the plan. So there was an intersection later coming in my life. As you know, I have a daughter with special needs. And about 14 years ago, we were looking for something for her to do outside of the traditional therapy things of OT and PT. And we came across a riding program that was a couple miles from our house, and we live in Texas. And the core of this riding program, you know, just really spoke to me about, hey, we use horses to help people who have disabilities achieve all that they can achieve. And the fact that when they're on this horse, that they're free of any disability, they're treated like everybody else, and they can achieve whatever they want to achieve when they're up there, was really impactful. It was hugely beneficial to my daughter. From day one, she jumped on and was fearless and loved it. And, you know, it was one of those where it rekindled my passion for horses, because I'd stepped away for about 10 years as life kind of took over. We got really involved with the program out there in Texas. And then when we were relocating for my day job, we said, hey, if we could find a place where we could set one up on our own, I'd love to establish a nonprofit and run it and have it focus on individuals with disabilities and really grow something here that can have an impact not only for the individuals with disabilities, but people in our community. So we've been doing that for about 10 years. It's been awesome. Love it. We've touched hundreds of volunteers and kids
How many
coming
kids
through.
you got writing now, Brad?
On a weekly basis, I don't know, 35 or 40 kids coming through on a regular basis.
And I know obviously COVID has impacted, but you guys do a lot of traveling shows. Kids get the opportunity to win awards and show their work.
Yeah, so it's been a little bit of an unusual year for 2020. As you mentioned, one of the things we love doing is having the kids do competitions. And so we travel around the country with a smaller group of the kids to do competition. It is incredibly impactful for their development. They get public recognition for their achievements. For many of them, this is the only sport that they do. And so they get recognition by peers, and a lot of our kids are in mainstream schools. So, they get to take in their achievements and share that with their teachers and their friends. And so it gives them something to be able to say, hey, I compete just like you. I may not play basketball, but I still am an athlete. I still ride. I still get judged. I still achieve things, and here's my achievements. And yeah, so certainly 2020's put a little bit of a damper on it. We did get to go quite a few places, though, so that was good this year. Maybe not as many as we wanted, but it was good.
So anybody that's looking for some place to contribute money, first of all, they're in Rougemont. Somebody that's looking, that might know somebody that could share information that could benefit that family and that writer. You can look it up, www.brightstarstables.org, I believe is the website.
Yes, correct.
In terms of giving, donation, it's an incredible setup. Just a lot of love and giving and caring for the horses. So if you're looking for something to, bring value to others and that you could feel good about, Brad and Bright Star Stables and Heather, what they're doing there is incredible. It'd be a great place if somebody's looking for a place to give a little bit more. So what kind of needs are you going to have coming up in 2021?
Certainly in 2021, we'll continue to have our biggest need is the operational support. We do have a small fee we charge people who come through for lessons, and we had to take a pretty big hiatus in lessons because of COVID. We're back on a limited basis now. But the donations we get from the community and really support our underlying operations and care for the horses. We're 100% volunteer based. We have no paid employees. And so we have people who come out every day and help out. We have volunteers on the weekend. And so our overhead cost is pretty low. But we still have a pretty, you're caring for 7 or 8 horses, vet bills, feed bills, hay bills, just general supportive stuff around the farm. And so that's our biggest need at the moment, and will continue to be in 2021.
Awesome. Well, I know I'm very appreciative and admire you for what you guys do and what you're doing for those kids. And we'll certainly look forward to continuing to support you in every way that we can.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Baxter is utterly blessed to have you. Certainly the team is too. You've always done amazing things, and it was very kind for you to come on and share your experience and expertise with our following. And I really appreciate your time.
Hey, anytime, brother. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. Happy to come back.
I'm going to probably hold you to that. If anybody has any questions as we finish here, and I should have said this earlier, you're welcome to type them in, and Brad will be more than happy to answer them. If you think of a question later, you feel free to email it to us at info@shurigsolutions.com. But, we hope that our following and those that we had a nice group of people, number of people that showed up and registered to get to hear what Brad had to say. So we really appreciate your time. We hope that this brought you value. I don't see, you got some admirers as usual. So some nice things being said. But it doesn't look like any questions. So if we have a question that comes later, we'll get that out to Brad and we'll share it. But we appreciate everybody's time. We've got another webinar coming up next week that we'll be starting to send out we're pretty excited about. But I hope everybody has an incredible holiday. Get to spend some time with your family, and I wish everybody a very positive and healthy remainder of the year. And all the best to the Glazer family, Brad. Thanks again for coming on.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hear me, won't you speak to me when I open up? And I forward my thoughts to you, but sometimes I say you're thinking too much, and I don't wanna